Hello folks, how's it going? Matt here, and in today's video I thought we'd do a little bit of a tutorial on how to paint multicam for modern or current day miniatures. It's a little bit of a complicated pattern and therefore can be difficult to simplify down on a 28mm miniature. In this video I shall demonstrate how I like to paint multicam and hope it might be useful and help you out when painting your own modern miniatures. After priming the model with leather brown from Army Painter, I apply a base coat of German Camo beige. Be careful to leave the deepest areas in the leather brown. There's quite a lot of camouflage on this model, so take your time to get a good coverage with several coats before we move on to the next stage. German Camo Beige acts as a really nice base coat for lots of camouflages, I find, and is one of my go-to paints for modern miniatures. In the background you can see the paints I've prepared for the Multicam camouflage scheme. I shall reference these later in the video. To add a bit of a highlight, I'm going to dry brush white grey on top of the base coat. Be sure to wait for the beige to dry first though. This is to help pick out some of the edges on the uniform and the pockets and helmet. It might look a bit weird at this stage, but just helps to add a subtle highlight to the scheme. Now onto the camouflage pattern. To start off, we're going to paint thin down horizontal streaks of Panzer Ace's Africa Corps. It's a nice light green. Add thin little lines across the uniform. Something to bear in mind is that each separate piece of uniform has its own camouflage pattern. So ensure that your lines don't continue from, say, the trousers to the shirt, for instance. We want to break it up a little if we can. Next up is Panzer Ace's German tank crew, but any mid-green or a darker olive green will work fine here. With this colour we also want to create little streaks as before, but occasionally a blotch or a vertical line as well. Don't be afraid to cover small areas of the last colour as well when doing this. For the light brown, I use German Camo Pale Brown. This is an important colour to get right so that it blends the scheme together and is not too vibrant. German Pale Brown serves this purpose really well. Same as before, we want to create streaks, lines and blotches randomly, overlapping some of the other colours in places. This part starts bringing the camouflage scheme to life, making it pop. Okay, so starting to get a bit more tricky at this point. We want to apply a really small angled lines using a dark brown colour. I use Panzer Ace's Dark Rust. but a chocolate brown or a black brown will do the job just as well. These lines need to be thinner than our streaks earlier on the light green and the darker green. Try to create little L shapes or tiny little lines. It helps to thin the paint down quite a bit, I find. I mix the paint using Airbrush Flow Improver on the wet palette, and I find that gives me a decent brush control and allows me to paint these little shapes quite comfortably. Whoa, we're nearly there guys, keep going. Now we're on to the white. Same as the dark brown, little L shapes or angles. I seem to struggle with white paint being too thick for this out of the bottle, and the paint dries on the brush too quickly. Always found that. I've started using a white-grey airbrush paint, and that makes life a bit easier I find. I want the paint to flow well for these tiny little brush strokes. I've stuck to a size 2 paintbrush throughout this process, but you can try using a smaller brush if you're more comfortable with that for these final stages. So that's the basic camouflage for Multicam. This scheme is so common and you can use it for SAS, Spetsnaz, mercenaries, you name it. So it's really quite an essential scheme to master if you enjoy your modern wargaming. I hope with this video it helps a little, as it's quite a daunting camo to take on at face value. But if you take it stage by stage, break it down, and it's really quite achievable with a little practice. Last up, to complete the camo, we apply a coat of Nuln Oil, which will mute the camo and add some definition and shadows to bind everything together. Here is the model now that the shading has dried. Sorry about my dodgy camera work, but hopefully you can see how the pattern has come out. Now I just need to paint the rest of the model and paint a few buddies for this guy. Here we are. They're looking good. Once you have mastered Multicam, you'll want to learn other modern camouflage patterns as well. Always look striking on the tabletop to have a blend of camo patterns in your task force. Hopefully you found this video useful and helps with any fears over painting this pattern you might have. If you have found it useful, it would really mean the world if you could give us a like and a subscribe. The channel is really starting to pick up pace now, and I really appreciate the support. Thanks again for taking the time to watch this video. I'll see you at the next one. Goodbye.